Hello and welcome to Life Beats Radio. I am your host, Dawn Mack, and so very glad to be here with you on this Tuesday evening. And welcome in, everyone. So glad to have you here with us. And boy, if this is your first time stopping by Life Beats Radio tonight, you are in for a treat because our guest, oh my gosh, he has done so many phenomenal things and has had an amazing career as both an author and a musician, and very, very interesting to say the least. And I hope that your week is off to a great start and that God is blessing you abundantly. And, you know, it's not Monday. That's a blessing, right? But I hope that everything's going well for you. And I don't know wherever you are listening from tonight, I hope that it's finally starting to feel like fall in your part of the world. It certainly is here in North Carolina where I'm based, and the trees could not be more vibrant this year in color. God has just blessed us immensely with that, and it's seeing the beauty and the splendor of his canvas, so to speak. And it just makes me sometimes wish that it was fall year round because, you know, we get these beautiful, beautiful colors just once a year. And this year in particular here, it has just been incredible. I've just really reveled in it. So I hope where you are, you've been able to enjoy it as well. And so I want to kind of get to it tonight and give you a little bit of an idea on our guest. If you are familiar with him, then you're a huge fan and you know all too well who we have. If you are just happening by for the first time and you are checking us out, thank you so much. But let me give you a little bit of insight into who our special guest is. He is a Thomas Nelson author. He's a musician. His latest books include Tyndale, The Man Who Gave God an English Voice, which is the biography of William Tyndale, one of the most important yet least celebrated heroes of the Christian faith, and Majestie, the king behind the King James Bible. Our guest is also a contributor to the recently released Gaither Homecoming Bible, edited by gospel music legends Bill and Gloria Gaither. And our guest, his literary works have garnered many accolades. I mean, too numerous to name here, or we would spend the whole show just talking about everything that he's done. But not only that, he is also quite a popular songwriter, producer, recording artist. Freddie Washington, our guest has worked with him, and Freddie Washington earned a Grammy, Stellar and Dove Award nominations for his songwriting and production work, and the likes of hip-hop luminary The Truth and gospel dream winner Melinda Watts, and has released a debut project, The Jesus Record. He has done so much. I mean, our guest is just absolutely phenomenal, and we are so very proud tonight to welcome to Life Beats Radio, David TEEMS. Hello.
Hey, can you hear me?
How are you? I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, good. Oh, very well. Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was listening to your intro. I was so into it. I wasn't sure if I wasn't sure if I was on the line or not. Okay, good. I'm not really good at these parts.
You called right as the show was starting, and I couldn't jump over it in time. Hey, I know you're on the line.
Okay.
But thank you so much for waiting patiently, and thank you also for being our special guest this evening. It's such an honor to have you with us.
Oh, I thank you for the time. Yeah.
Well, you have had, as I was saying in the intro, you have had an amazing career. I mean, it's just quite stellar to say the least. And I am just amazed. First of all, I love reading. I love literary works, and I've always had a knack for writing. And so when I, of course, found out that, you know, you were an author, it piqued my interest immediately.
Right.
And you know, between being an author and being a musician, which one do you think is kind of more your forte?
You know, that's I laugh because that's kind of a tough question. Well, we moved to Franklin, Tennessee back in 2002, and I was slowly migrating into books because I think my heart of hearts is to write books. I think if someone put a gun to my head and said, "You got to do one thing," I would probably say books. But then again, it's interesting how God works. Last year, because I had pretty much put music to the side, to the margins of my life. And then last year, out of the blue, an old friend of mine, this lady who used to babysit me when I was a newborn, gave me a guitar that belonged to her mother. And this guitar was around, I was around this guitar when I was a newborn, when I was a toddler, when I was 4 or 5 years old. We used to be real close with this family. And she gave me this guitar, and it's one of those, it's just one of those things that kind of drops out of the sky. It's totally unexpected. And this guitar is kind of bringing music back, because I have such a deep history with this guitar. It brought music back to me, and so I'm doing books now that I want to be able to put the music and the writing together. As you know, one of the things about this guitar was, God speaks to us in through the imaginary, through figurative language. He does it all through Scripture. And with this guitar, because the guitar was made in 1952, it belonged to her mother, and the guitar sounds better today. It's more because of the wood has been able to be seasoned, and the guitar sounds better today than it did when it was first made. And I kind of needed that metaphor last year, and it's God's subtle way of speaking to me. So at a time when I thought the music was kind of behind me, kind of one of those in there, and I did that, it's kind of like I can't really answer your question, point blank. Well, writing is more important. They're kind of, hopefully they're going to work together. I wouldn't be the writer, I wouldn't be the book writer that I am today had I not had the lyrical background and actually the music background. Music is it's a system of rhythm and pacing and compressing large ideas into small space, and of course wordcraft, and all of those things by kind of an artistic evolutionary process made me the writer I am today. I wouldn't be the same book writer. Even the biographies that I've done, there's a touch of lyricism in all of them, and I owe that to my musical background. So it's really hard to say that one is over the other, but I think if the gun was in my head, probably books would be. I just enjoy that so much. It taps into some of my deeper groanings, is maybe a way to put it. And I remember when I was working on the biography of King James, Majesty, the king behind the King James Bible, I had so much enjoyment writing that book that I would actually sit in my office and I'd kind of look around my office and think to myself, I'm really getting away with this. Because it was just so much fun. And the William Tyndale book demanded so much more, even research-wise, and it was just a completely different time period. That was in the early 1500s, where King James book was in the early 1600s, late 1500s. And so there were two completely different time periods. So each book asked very different things of me, but I just enjoy that, but I'm beginning to enjoy music again too. So that's a very long way around it.
Oh, you did, most definitely. Thank you. Well, one thing that intrigued me about the two books, Tyndale and Majesty, is what kind of made you venture into writing and researching about these two figures? Because, man, what a story each has.
Exactly. That's a very good question, and I should have that on my little list of questions that I sent out, because I do love to answer this. I don't even know where it started. Years and years ago, I started following the works of William Shakespeare, play by play. I started going to plays. I started getting them on audio books, and literally there was a time where I was going through 2 or 3 plays a week, going to sleep with them, and just really feeding. I don't know what it was. It's something about Shakespeare. I think my history with the King James Bible kind of led me back to Shakespeare. I took Shakespeare in college, but it just didn't stick. It was all about analyzing Shakespeare and breaking it down, and it just wasn't as much. There was no fun in it. But when I became a Christian in 1981, or a serious Christian, I should say, I went right to the King James Bible and read it 2 or 3 times. and gradually gravitated back to Shakespeare. It's interesting, too, because the King James translators, they were all steeped in that Elizabethan the linguistic vitality. All of them, pretty much all of them had seen Hamlet. Shakespeare was on King James's payroll. So all of that happened in the same time period. So, approaching 2011, which was the 400th anniversary of the King James Bible, the Thomas Nelson Publishers was looking for someone to do a bio on King James, and I had already reading Shakespeare. I started reading about Shakespeare, reading about the times, and I started reading about Elizabeth I, and then James, the first of England. And so by the time, that Nelson asked me about doing a book on James, I already was well read on the subject and just had the time of my life. And then that doing that book introduced me to William Tyndale. I had been, as a linguistic, as a language person, a literary person, I was familiar with Tyndale, but nowhere near the depth that I was about to enter into. And so they wanted a second book. It was a 2-book deal. And so we did one on Majesty, on King James. And then I was going to do a twin biography, a single book on John Wycliffe, who did an English Bible in the 1380s, and William Tyndale. But once I started reading about William Tyndale, I finally told the publisher, I said, look, I can still do the twin bio with John Wycliffe and William Tyndale, but Tyndale is so fascinating. And as a man of God, as a believer, as a literary person, I have discovered a man here that is almost hidden from us. And it kind of blew me away. I mean, even scholars today talk about that Tyndale Shakespeare English that we speak, and yet, you mentioned you mentioned the chief architect of our language. Most people would say, well, Shakespeare, but very few of us are aware of the incredible contributions that William Tyndale has made. And as a believer, if we have a grandeur in our English language, if we have nobility and splendor in our language, it is really, and this is no exaggeration, this is not hyperbole, it is really due to William Tyndale. In the early 1500s, everything, church was all in Latin. Of course, they were in control of the Roman Catholic Church was in control of most of Western culture, but particularly in England. And all the liturgy was in Latin. At Oxford and at Cambridge universities, you could only speak Latin. You couldn't speak English except on holidays or on some weekends. And so the English language, according to Sir Thomas More, was at the bottom of the pond. It was a very crude, language used by certain classes of society. But then Tyndale comes along and gives us the New Testament first, the New Testament in English, and introduces phrases like "Give us this day our daily bread," and "For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory," and just hundreds and hundreds of phrases like that we associate with the King James Bible, but they originated with the translation of William Tyndale. So he just became a hero of mine instantly, and I'm still fascinated with him.
Well, I'm amazed because I learned something just now when you said, those couple phrases. I did not realize that William Tyndale was the author of those phrases. And, when you read the King James Bible, I think a lot of people just have that misconception that King James Bible means, or King James Version means that King James wrote it. So you don't ever think that there's another author out there, as you say. I mean, William Tyndale has kind of gotten lost in the fray of the Bible and its many translations, in fact.
Yes.
Quite intriguing, no doubt.
Yeah, he probably estimates are as high as 90 to 94% of the King James New Testament is the translation of William Tyndale, and most often word for word. I mean, and we have newer versions since I think the 70s and 80s. We have newer versions of the Bible. And for instance, and this is not this is not a bad judgment of the Message, but there's a Bible translation of the Message, one of the more recent translations. And for instance, where William Tyndale gave us, or translated, "Give us this day our daily bread," the Message translates that as "Keep us alive with 3 square meals."
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, and something is lost. You've lost, suddenly, it's no longer a rhapsody or this powerful linguistic vitality. It is now information. Basically, and again, it may sound like I'm judging the Message, but it's a very popular translation. But basically, it's lost its music. And for thine is the kingdom and power and glory. Behold the Lamb of God. Or I am the way, the truth, and the life. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Seek and ye shall find. These are treasures that the Tyndale Bible introduced into our language. And so that was in 1526. And Shakespeare came along in the 1590s, 70 or 80 years later, and benefited by this incredible emancipation, really, of the English language. I mean, consider this. Think about this now. You go to it's 1526. You're going to church. You don't understand Latin, so you're going and you're seeing this beautiful procession. The Catholic liturgy and the gold and the frankincense and all this stuff. But everything is in Latin, and you don't understand Latin. The typical believer didn't understand Latin. Many of the priests who intoned the Mass didn't understand Latin. They knew how to speak it, but didn't understand it themselves. And so you're a believer. You have no idea really what's going on, and all of a sudden, a Bible is smuggled into England. Tyndale had to leave England to do an English translation, but a Bible comes along that tells you that God is love, that says to you, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. You're hearing these things in your own language for the first time. Mm-hmm. And so there's not only an emancipation of the human spirit, by these things, because all of a sudden it's not a bunch of priests telling you what to believe, but you actually have God in a language you can understand. It not only emancipates your spirit as a believer, but it emancipated the language itself. There was somewhere between Tyndale and Shakespeare, 30,000 or more new words flooded the English language. And that's unheard of. I think in Shakespeare's day, the late Jacobean, or probably the early, maybe up to 1613 or something like that, the English language was at its peak. And we will really never see that type of power in the language. Again, matter of fact, we're in the decline. We're dumbing down. Culture is dumbing down our language, and as they do that, they're kind of dumbing us down at a lot of different levels. But that surge, that splendor that was introduced in language, originated with William Tyndale.
Well, gosh, I know you bring some great points up, because as a child growing up in the church, hearing some of those common phrases that preachers would say, or just you would recite in the Lord's Prayer. I mean, there was so much power in those words, and like you say, it just had kind of a nice flow to it, and it stuck. It was not memorization, but it stuck that as even into adulthood, it stuck with you. And other translations of the Bible, as good as they may be for people to make it easier for people to really grasp, God's word, you lose that beauty of the words themselves in saying it when you're reading something that, like you say, is just it comes across more as being informational than it does having that real, true, not only meaning but feeling. And it's just something about it that's very magical, if you will. And so William Tyndale, I mean, he will forever live on as one of the greatest authors of the world, because, my gosh, he changed the face of the Bible and made it so, English was never the same again, Absolutely.
And, the interesting thing about it, too, and one of the things I wanted to address when you said, there is a musicality about the well, I'll just say the King James Bible, but the William Tyndale translation. There's music in that, and when you have a kind of a music attached to it, it does make it easy to memorize those kind of things, like you're saying. But one of the interesting things about William Tyndale. He was probably, in the eyes of the Roman Catholic Church at the time, he was probably public enemy number one, particularly to Sir Thomas More, who was rising in power under Henry VIII, because a vernacular Bible or a Bible in English was against the law in England. As a matter of fact, in 1519, a family of 6 were burned at stake for teaching their children the Lord's Prayer in English. That's how severe it was. So for Tyndale to do a translation, he left England in 1524, but to do a translation, he had to leave England and he had to hide. That's why it's very difficult for biographers to kind of pin him down. Well, we know he was in Cologne, Hamburg, but he was in Wittenberg. He may or may not have had conversations with Martin Luther. We just don't know, because he had to hide to live. And it's interesting because here he is translating the works of Paul. For instance, in Romans 8:35, now this is the William Tyndale translation. It says this: "Who shall separate us from the love of God? Shall tribulation or anguish or persecution or hunger or nakedness or peril or sword? As it is written, for thy sake we are killed all the day long, and are counted as sheep appointed to be slain." William Tyndale was basically living under the same conditions that the Apostle Paul was. Paul had to basically, there were places where he was stoned or thrown out and left for dead. And, William Tyndale translated the words of Paul while living a very similar life that Paul was living at the time. And what that does, it gives the word itself, it gives the translation like a living imprint, almost a prophetic touch of God, because he was actually living those very things. And so it's not just a bunch of translators in the 20th century sitting in some really nice, cool academic setting, doing a translation. Here's a guy who had to wake up every morning and account for his life. Will today be the day that they catch me? He had to elude his captors, and I tell you that the English Guard, they would send spies. They wanted William Tyndale dead because they did not want. I think Thomas More saw the future in William Tyndale. He saw that this man is single-minded and he's unstoppable. And that's another one of the things that endeared me to William Tyndale, which he's the real deal. I'm so glad, as a believer, as an English-speaking believer, I'm just so glad that it was this man who gave us our quintessential English Bible, and not just the New Testament, but most of the Old Testament. He translated from Genesis to 2nd Chronicles and then the book of Jonah. So the phrase, "let there be light," is a William Tyndale translation.
Wow.
Entreat me not to leave thee, or following after thee. Whither thou goest, I will go. My God will be thy God. Where thou lodgest, I will lodge. That beautiful phrase out of, I think it's in the book of Ruth. William Tyndale gave us that. Or, the Lord bless thee and keep thee. The Lord make his face to shine upon thee and be gracious to thee. That William Tyndale translated those for us. And it's not enough just to say, well, wasn't that in the original Greek or the original Hebrew? Yes, it was. But even one of the most noted literary critics, who's not Christian, who's vociferously not Christian, Harold Bloom, attributes the glory of the language. I'll quote him directly here. It says, this is from Harold Bloom, nearly everything memorable in the English New Testament is the achievement of the matchless William Tyndale and not the early Christian authors. No honest critic able to read the Koine original could resist the conclusion that Tyndale throughout transcends his proof text, or the original manuscript, to a sublime degree. And what that means is that Tyndale gave the original manuscripts, the original Greek and the original Hebrew, gave it a majesty that was not necessarily there in the original transmission, and yet he did so without changing the meaning whatsoever. He was very much he was an editorial Attila the Hun. He was very strict, editorial savagery when it comes to the translation. So again, it's just, and the same man, Harold Bloom, says that William Tyndale was the only rival of William Shakespeare, Geoffrey Chaucer, and Walt Whitman as the richest author in the English language. And that blows me away. Here's a guy that most of us have not even heard of, who's considered a rival of Shakespeare as one of the greatest authors in the English language.
That is absolutely amazing. I mean, just amazing. And, well, speaking of your book, Gloria Gaither, in a column she wrote in the September-October 2012 issue of Homecoming magazine, she compared the work of Tyndale, who translated the Bible, as we've been talking about, for the common man, or the plowboy, if you will, to the version of the Bible that she and Bill Gaither recently released. And it features several devotional selections written by you. Can you speak to these comparisons?
What comparison did she make? I don't have that.
She compared the work of Tyndale, who translated the Bible, to the version of the Bible that she and Bill Gaither recently released, which features several devotional selections written by you.
Was that that was the New King James, was it not? Or was that the King?
I believe it was.
I really don't know how to answer that, to tell you the truth. I don't have the quote in front of me to know exactly what she was referring to. I do know with Gloria, she is one of the we've known her for quite a few years, and she's always been a big fan of my writing. She liked the music I did, but she was always a big fan of my writing. And I think through this book with Tyndale, it really turned her head to, like me, she was not aware of the great contribution this man made. We were over there, we were with them not too terribly long ago, and Bill and Gloria are very different. Bill was even into Tyndale, and that was just really cool to hear both of them talk about it.
Oh yeah, that's definitely. Now, I have a question for you regarding culture for a moment, because with our society moving at such a fast pace all the time, and it seems like it's ever increasing. And with language, as you were speaking to it being dumbed down quite a bit across the board in many areas, but especially language. With language changing like it is, what makes a 500-year-old translator significant today?
Wow, that's a good question. I think for me, it's that we should never forget our heritage, the deep history. William Tyndale probably represents our deepest cultural memory. If you consider the King James Bible that very thing, the King James Bible is a part of our deepest cultural memory. So therefore, Tyndale kind of comes in the back door, but in truth, it is William Tyndale and his translation that becomes our deepest cultural memory. And what I mean by that is that I grew up on the King James Bible. I know my parents did, and their parents did, and probably 300 or 400 years of believers grew up, and the language was shaped basically by our Bible, and specifically the King James Bible. It is still considered by scholars, along with the works of William Shakespeare, as the greatest work of literature in the English language. And after 400 years, that's pretty good. So I think the best way to answer that question is for us to not lose sight of where we came from, because we're the music in our language, the majesty, the splendor, is slowly being drained out. For that 140 space Twitter comment, or the text messaging, which so corrupts and contaminates our spelling and other things, which is kind of a fun point, because back in Tyndale's day and back in Shakespeare's day, spelling was a matter of personal preference. Shakespeare spelled his name 4 or 5 different ways. People go, well, he couldn't be that smart. Well, he was. It's just there was no standardized spelling. But I think that's the best answer I can come up with is that it, we should not lose our vision of where we came from, because we're entering into dangerous territory as far as language goes. Because once we take the music out, and there's a very severe, speaking of culture, and I think this is part of the answer too, there's kind of a democratization of the arts going on right now, and we have the whole American Idol phenomena over the past how many years, and while everybody gets a shot at it, which sounds really good, but what we have now, because pretty much anyone now can do a book, anyone can do a CD, and that's really great, and yet at the same time, the standards have gotten lower and lower and lower. And so there's this great, I refer to it as a democratization, or this great equalization of the arts. But, and so really fine art from artists who really either suffer for their, I'll use poetry as an example, or what I do in WordCraft, that have somewhat suffered for it or really worked hard for it. A lot of those people can just kind of get lost in the shuffle, because now it seems like, in many ways, it's become a popularity contest. If you have a large platform and a large following, it doesn't matter the quality of your book; they're going to buy it. And so I think we do. We're going to have to check ourselves, because music has really gone down the tube ever since. We want everything for free. Information is free. Well, it might be free, but how am I going to feed my family? I have a musician friend of mine who's written songs for Michael English and Avalon, and tons of writers like that. I mean, tons of singers like that. We had 600 Cup and 60 major hits. Diamond Rio did one of his songs, and he says he wakes up every day now and wonders how in the world he's going to make a living. It's just in the music business. It's really taken a hit. Musicians, it's very difficult for musicians to make a living, and authors, it's the same way. And it's, like I said, everybody can do a book, and that sounds good. You've got a book in you. There's people out there pushing that because they can make money by doing your book. But I'm a little skeptical as to the quality of things that are being put out. And that's scary. So all of that majesty, all of that splendor, all that grandeur that was so much a standard to reach for, has gotten lower and lower and lower.
Yeah.
For myself, I really work. I put 7 days a week and many, many hours every day. The Tyndale book took me over a year, and that was after months of research too. And so it's a lot of what I see in culture is a little disheartening. And I'm looking for that place of hope to come, somewhere.
Oh, yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think, as good as social media and all the outlets out there on the Internet now that people have to promote themselves, it has kind of been an open market for any and all, regardless of talent or quality of content. And it has really put a hurting on the music industry and, on the literary aspect of what's being produced, because I think people just decided, well, I can do it. I've got that way to promote myself, kind of thing. And speaking of platforms, I have to ask you this before we wrap, because I think it's so important. The Reverend Billy Graham, he's going to preach his last sermon on Monday, and he has always preached from the King James version of the Bible, and this is such a phenomenal, prolific message that he is going to give everyone. And what do you see are going to be some of the takeaways from this message that will be unlike anything we've ever heard Reverend Graham, speak to us about before?
Well, I don't know as to the exact specifics of the things he's going to talk about. I can guess, I think, but for me, it's almost like the splendor of our language. Like I said, we're losing that, and I think Billy Graham. How old is he? He's in his 90s, right?
He's 95.
Okay, here's a man who's 95. Almost like the splendor and the grandeur of our language, that we're kind of losing touch with that. Here's a man giving his last sermon. It almost is the same thing. You know what I'm saying? But when I think of Billy Graham, I think of grandeur. I think of splendor. I think of a man who's changed my heart in years past, and my wife's heart, and so many of my friends. I've been to Billy Graham crusades back in college, back in the 70s, and I think for me, if it's frightening to see our language being dumbed down and seeing that splendor just kind of being diminished, seeing a great man of God like that on his way out is, I don't want to say it's frightening, because there's some very powerful preachers coming up too, but there's something to be said there. It's an end. It's an end of an epoch, if I could say it that way. And I think that would be the takeaway for me, that for whoever's listening, to listen to every word the man says at as many depths and as many layers of those words, because he can make a simple statement, and there's so many layers and so many fathoms of depth to those layers, and that we're losing that. And we want to, we need to try to be jealous of that and hold on to that as much as we possibly can.
Yes, I could agree with you more. I think Billy Graham, to me, has always, he's just a tremendous man of God, and he is so well revered worldwide, and so deeply respected. And I cannot wait to see. My son is actually a student at Liberty University in Lynchburg, Virginia, and he called me this evening. He was very excited because he is going to be on a team of students from Liberty that will be taking phone calls from people and helping win people to Christ as the crusade goes on Monday. And it's going to be a 2-day thing up at Liberty that they're doing. So he is just ecstatic. He said, "Mom, I've been talking to Christians, since I've been a Christian about their faith," but he said, "I've never had the opportunity to talk to people who want to come to know Christ." He said, "I am so pumped about this." So as a parent, you just, that's the kind of phone call you want to get from your children. It's just amazing. It's so touched my heart. But yeah, I was really curious, because you being the writer that you are, and Billy Graham being the wonderful orator, and having preached from King James all these years in his ministry, it just seemed fitting to ask your opinion of that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, he's such a treasure. He's been a treasure, and I hopefully he'll live beyond 100 years. 100 years old. But this is his last sermon. I think you're right. It's a phenomenon. It's truly a capital E event.
For sure. And I have one more question to ask you before we close. The Tyndale Society, and I was very curious about this when I read it, that, which is the leading authority of all things Tyndale. They gave you an outstanding review of your biography. And what does an endorsement like that from the Tyndale Society mean for you and the book?
Well, actually, for me personally, I could finally wipe the sweat off my brow, because you really, if you can work on a thing all year, but boy, it really has to pass muster sending it to the Tyndale Society. Because David Danielle, who's chairman of the Tyndale Society, probably in his mid-70s, I think now, he's the premier Tyndale scholar. A lot of the quotes in my book, I quoted David Danielle, and so it has to go through him and a team of Tyndale scholars there at Tyndale Society, and they were just so incredibly kind and just gave me a lovely review that basically that I had found a way into Tyndale studies that others had not considered, and because I talked a lot about the effects of exile. And the effects of the suffering on Tyndale's writing, and they really appreciated that. And what I discovered is, yes, it's an academic society, the Tyndale Society, but these are also men of God. These are men who follow Tyndale's teachings, and that's what kind of moved me. They were just incredibly kind. So yeah, it was. I could go past that one. And as on this second we're in the second edition now, and they've actually put excerpts of that review in the front matter of the book. So that does help. It really does. People can pick it up, and it's like validation. It's like having an endorsement from them is a big deal. So I truly appreciated that.
Well, and in my opinion, that is, it doesn't get any more of a higher compliment than coming from the Tyndale Society themselves. So, that's incredible. Well, David TEEMS, thank you so very much for being our guest this evening and taking time to share about this. I mean, I can talk to you for hours. You are so interesting. And, really, and so enlightening in terms of your knowledge of literature and especially this project and the works that you've done. And congratulations to all your success in that way. And certainly look forward to more projects as they come forth. And anything currently that you're working on that you'd like to let listeners know about before we wrap here? I am working. I'm at about 2/3 into a new book. I kind of want to keep that to myself right now. I don't. Definitely. When I'm doing a new book, I try not to talk about it too much because you kind of diffuse the energy. There's a certain tension when you're writing a book or doing something new because a lot of it's just pure discovery, and you get your ideas flowing. And if you talk too much about it, it kind of weakens the tension. And so I don't want to talk about that too much. But I am going to be doing another voiceover recording with different versions of the Bible, probably more like the NIV and some King James, and doing more music, more of my own music associated with it. So as soon as we have something on that, hopefully by Christmas we'll have that, and we will be one of the first ones that you'll know about it. Oh, well, thank you so very much. Yeah. Well, again, appreciate your time this evening for sharing. It's been a real pleasure and honor for us, and love to have you back when you get the new project out, and we'll talk about that at length. And so thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. Thank you so much for your time.
And may God continue to bless you and all that you do.
All right.
We have been speaking to David TEEMS, and he is the author of Tyndale and also Majesty. And I tell you, what an incredible person. I love speaking with him. And being so literary-minded myself, I grew up loving to read. I love to write. And this is just, he's just one of those people I literally could talk to for hours on end about, just all of the research that he did that went into these books, and he's just a phenomenal author and has done so much, and I can't wait for his next project. I don't even know what it is, and I'm already excited. So we want to extend a huge thank you to David TEEMS for being our special guest this evening. And if you would like to, keep up with him on social media, you can find him at David TEEMS, TEEMS.com. You can also find him on Facebook, and it's just simply David TEEMS. And also, it's David TEEMS on Twitter. So please, if you want to know what's happening with him, that's the best way to follow him. And we just want to say a huge thank you again to him for being our special guest this evening. And many, many thanks to all of you out there for listening. And if you're a first-time listener, thank you so much for stopping by this evening and tuning in. We greatly appreciate it, and welcome aboard. So with that is going to wrap our show for this evening. But we are just so glad that you were able to be here and spend some time with us. It has been truly a blessing to have you with us, and we will certainly be back here again very soon. So we look forward to the time when we can spend with you again. Take care, all. Enjoy the remainder of your week, and have a wonderful weekend. God bless you, and good night.